Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on a Sunday afternoon. I'm Christine Shoemaker. I run Shoebox Projects and Shoebox Arts and Art and Cake, our online art magazine. And Shoebox Projects was is my alternative art space. It started off as a physical space here where I live at the brewery near downtown LA, in my loft where I also live. And then the pandemic hit, and so we went online, and we've been offering artist exhibitions, solo exhibitions. We've also been doing group shows, whether they're curated or juried. And so, yeah, we've, just kept it going. So eventually we'll bring it back physically again. In different ways. We'll have to see how that goes. So we're always looking for fun opportunities. I had a broom closet that I turned into a little gallery. That was part of Shoebox Project. So yeah. So we'll have to, eventually see. But for now, we're, still able to use the platform of, the virtual platform and have exhibitions. And I do that because I want to, I try to help artists bring, bodies of work together, give them deadlines for creating work, and also to be able to talk about their work, especially, these artist talks, because you can never do too many artist talks in your career. And so the more we talk about our work, the better. And Eric and I worked together for a few months over the last year or two. I mean, we've known each other for like a couple of years now, since when you were living here, I think, and then you moved. And I've loved his work, since the beginning. So I thought it would be perfect for a solo show. So yeah, with that, Eric, if I'd love to hear more about like your history as an artist, your career, and we can maybe touch on that. And then I'll share my screen and we could talk about specifically about the exhibition. But yeah, if you want to, jump in and don't mind telling us a little about yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks, Christine. And first, I just want to say thank you to you and Shelley and Shoebox, and it's been a fun opportunity, and I'll dare I say more of a challenge than I expected to do this show, considering everything, and yeah, and it's been a curious year. So I think stepping back, art studio is my sacred space. That's like where I work. It's where I live. It's where I exist in, and being fairly kind of transient through accident and happenstance and by choice as well over the last few years. It's been a kind of a tumultuous run. From 2019, I left Duluth, and after 18 years there, after I left art school, I moved up there, and had a very fulfilling, busy career, and in choosing to blow it all up and kind of step away from that, I naively thought I was going to just like move out to California and settle down and just make some artwork right away. Instead, I spent the first 6 months working at a ranch in Malibu, living out of my car. Hard to work a studio out of a car. Although once I moved to Ojai, I built this gallery on the back of a car, but that's a whole other issue. And then bounced around and lived in Ventura for a bit and landed in Ojai, got everything set up there. Took a big run at encaustics, did a number of abstractions, got in the Ojai Studio Artist Group there, which was great. And really was starting to gain a little momentum. And then, as we all know, I was in a really nice group show in Ventura at the H Gallery, curated by Ulrike Coleman, and she and I had a really good time like setting that up. It was all great, and then the pandemic hit like 2 days later. So that it was kind of like a mixed blessing. It was like, all right, hunker down in the studio, make work. and kind of explore that. However, with the pandemic, as we kind of all know, there's a certain level of emotional and mental burden that kind of went with that, and the toll of that really hit my landlord heavily, and he chose to kind of change his circumstance, which affected mine immediately. And so sometime in July, I went from finally getting a studio set up in Ojai in 2020 to moving to Los Angeles, and which was great, and it's paid off very nicely in the long run. But ended up having to build a studio there, and kind of like finally getting into the stream of making there. Then Jessica and I, we chose to move north to Cambria, California, which meant another studio move. And so basically annual studio moves have been a little bit of a challenge, but functionally speaking, I've dealt with breaks, I've dealt with moves before. So in my mind, there's a narrative, there's a process. Getting here into Cambria, there is the added issue of I had to kind of build a studio space out of renovating a old 1938 barn, while also dealing with some major health issues, which impeded my body and mentally on multiple levels, and to different depths. And so it's been an interesting kind of course of events that have kind of led me here to making on my mind, reading, following things, feeling like I can always do more than I actually can, and then trying to figure out a way to get my body not only to work and function, but also to have a nugget of creativity, and I don't mean from like the following one's passion sense, but actually like being able to go from just the daily function of existing to being able to have the energy to be able to maneuver and create. And I tend to work very physically in general, and so it's been a lot of fits and starts, and just to get into the health side, for a moment, I, after 10 to 12 years of health issues, examining this and that option and this specialist and whatnot, I was finally diagnosed with Lyme disease, but with a major co-infection of Bartonella, which impacts the neurological system and brain. Quite a bit, we're learning. And so in that, it's been a lot of challenges with thinking and arthritis hitting different parts of my body, and fatigue. That's just like a fatigue of, I can't tell you how many times, literally just yesterday, I was out in the studio forcing myself to work, and you just stop. You literally, your body's just like, this isn't happening. So, and kind of learning how to accept that and balance that. And so, it's been a learning curve for me to, I'll have to admit, I've kind of used and abused my body. I built things, ran up and down mountains with chainsaws for years. I've used it. And so moving from this space of thinking I can do all this to being inhibited, to like understanding the value of just being able to work for a half an hour instead of, oh, I'm going to work for 12 hours or do this, or I'm going to work on this sculpture and just get lost in it for a week or two. And so it's really kind of shifted my perspective on all that. And so it's been great. And it's definitely has impacted the work significantly. When I first was able to make, it was just kind of like, okay, let's just see what we can do. Let's just make some marks. They're very kind of narrative, caricaturish self-portraits. I was kind of getting into using microbes as some of the layering, because I was just kind of what was in my mind. And then as that kind of moved forward in my process, having a little more energy, I was able to have more time to investigate and explore some kind of themes around that. I didn't want to use myself and my illness as a core to the work. So through the course of, last year coming into this spring, and examining that, and seeing and witnessing a number of kind of people go through a lot worse than what I have, we'll say, and being slightly in a spiritual bent, I, kind of started thinking and focusing on kind of, beings. I've had a series of artwork that kind of deal in kind of accession and growth and whatnot, ascension and growth. But I really kind of was needing to be careful in like how kind of out there I could go, because I knew that I'd be working kind of fits and stages. I want to be able to keep a certain congruity in what I was doing as kind of a, as kind of a lifetime artist, like, and somebody who works serially. That narrative is something I always think about, that from work 20 years ago that, say Linda curated me in, back then, like I can make that connection to everything that I've done until now. And so that's kind of always in my mind, because I think of myself as a career artist, and I use the word career loosely because it's just what I do and who I am, and it's not about showing and selling. It's making, and I know like till my final breath I'll be making, because that's that curiosity, that drive to explore and to make marks and like to experiment is the utmost underlying like factor that brings me joy, and that motivates me, and it and keeps me up at night. And so through that and through that kind of breaking down and thinking about where I wanted to take the work, and with a touch of the spirituality in it, and a couple of people close to me went through some really hard things, and I just like, I was out in the studio and I was just working angry and making marks on whatever, and it's kind of how I work and process, and at times, especially when I'm frustrated. And I started just drawing these angels, and they just started coming up. And
Eric, I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you want me to start showing some images from the show since you're talking about that now?
yeah, I mean, we can start that, and then I'll talk about the first like kind of set of them, and then we can slide into that if you're fine with that.
Yeah.
So what's part of the show here, such as this first large piece, these angels came about. I've always I always have a sense of humor in my artwork. I always have a slightly sardonic sense of humor to it. And there was kind of a freedom in working with some scale and feeling able within my body to actually make some marks and feel like I'm actually like reading and reacting. Up until this point with these pieces, these are January of this year, it was a really kind of controlled mess where they almost felt more like illustration than anything else, because there was not a lot of action, not a lot of emotion to them. There was in the final pieces, but it was just a limitation of ability, essentially, a function of my body. So beginning with these that are in this show, I started working with these angels, and then began talking, this conversation of these beings, or angel-like beings with these figures, kind of came to the forefront. through a number of drawings. I'm a huge fan of drawing through thoughts and process and work. And eventually this distillation of the character came down, and this idea of this kind of angelic being began to become distilled, and I really began to enjoy this narrative that was developing in them. And not only was it me seeking this other, somebody else dealing with life or death, can be representative of a child reaching up for their parent. And so that began like this whole exploration. They were a little tighter in the spring, and then the work from the last couple months really felt really loosened up, and really like the last 3/4 of the work really are from this summer, where things are feeling a little better. So how about that for a short intro?
That's great. Do you want to tell us about like how you put the show together, or because you had sent some images a few months ago and I asked you for more. And so,
Yeah.
kind of that process, and yeah, and just like what you were thinking as far as the cohesive, this cohesive body.
Yeah, I how can I say this?
Oops,
Um,
clicked on the wrong thing.
so I kind of, being from the exhibition gallery end, like I like concise shows. It's a little such a different format to think about a running narrative like this online, and so I know there's going to be a little bit of chronology involved. Um, but I really struggled knowing where I wanted the work to go to, and versus where it was. Like when we extended during the summer, it really was, I was working in fits and starts, and when I am in my head or not feeling well, my marks get tight, and when things get tight, the construction gets tight. The I start thinking too formally, and it becomes a limiting factor in the artwork because it's lacking action, it's lacking gesture, etc. And so when we pushed it into September, it kind of gave me an opportunity with a hard deadline to just like, all right, let's hit the reset button. I went back, looked through everything. I prepped 100 pieces roughly, 100 surfaces, and just kind of like just started working and cranking as much as my body would let me to. And I knew I wanted some sculptural element as well, and sculpture is almost an easier way for me to go, especially when working with a body of work already. I can easily jump to sculpture. So it was kind of it was a good, how can I say, binge, so to speak, a good test of the body and the mind. And even though the studio wasn't totally ready for what I did to it, I definitely broke it in.
That's awesome. And I have a couple questions, and if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to jump in. So you call this the healing series. How has it healed you? Is it healing you? Is it representative of being healed? Like, how do you correlate that, or how is it the action of working that's healing you? Where does that come from?
Yeah, I think it's still in process. It's probably in process for everyone, really, and on multiple levels. I know for myself, like physically with with the issue I have, like that is definitely in process still. Um, and so I think, I like the idea of being a bit ambiguous with my work. I don't like to be too direct in labeling and titles and whatnot. And that's come about over the years for multiple reasons. But for me personally, using this direction of healing, it allows a very like open narrative to me, and it allows me to kind of think and process where this work can go itself too within the body of work. And yeah, I think too, I guess I'll add as well, like the theater of the healing body. There's also another meaning to that, and that's just kind of, it's tied in with just transparency. Growing up in northern Wisconsin, where people don't talk about illnesses or go to doctors, even for that matter, it's such a different time. Like, I am working in the studio that's very close to neighbors, and I feel like I'm always being watched and always being asked how I'm doing. And when you have something that's going to take a year and a half or so to heal from, it's an interesting notion to be asked about these things, or within the ups and downs and on a given day. And I think that is it's kind of corollary to like making a show and putting the show together, where, I think there's something wrong if, as an artist, you're making work and each one is ticking off every box and working. There's going to be ups and downs naturally, and that's kind of also how we heal and how we live and how we exist. And so I think that was kind of the part of the notion of just using that kind of more ambiguous term healing series as well, and also the title of the show.
Definitely. Another quick question, and then Vicky has a question. As a serial artist, how and I don't know how to ask this, I guess. How do you, because your work is very, like you said, you've come to it with some anger, with, you put your physical self in here. So how do you feel like, creating this series, these, that are all very similar as a serial artist? Does that help you? Like how, I don't know, how do you correlate that with the type of work, the content in the work? And yeah, and as far as storytelling goes as an artist too.
Yeah, well, I think we as artists make what we like. And personally, I appreciate and love all facets of art making. I enjoy artwork that has emotive quality to it, and has a sense of feeling. And I like seeing tactility and hand and process and some of that dirtiness in there. And so for me, I think whether it's working, it's a working physically like that is, for me, it's kind of this natural state. It's kind of just developed over time, where it allows me this looseness and allows me this ability to kind of adapt, explore, see these lines, allow layers and texture to develop. And whether it is, I don't know if, like some of it sometimes comes from anger, but other times it comes from happiness. It's really this switch I'm able to flip in the studio, where I disappear into the work, and I'm working, I sometimes consider aggressively or assertively into something, other times not. And it's kind of always a scale there as well. But I find that when I can get into that certain mode of making, there's a freedom in it, and there's an emotive quality that comes in that's a little different than when my thinking brain is in control.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Vicky.
Thanks. Hey, big kudos and applause to you. This is a really nice body of work, and I actually really love that you did art as you were healing, and in the process of healing, even against the fatigue that was setting in, so big kudos to you. Just by the way that Christine is scrolling, now she's going from the bottom, going back up. There's two questions I have, and one of them looks like, okay, here's where we started, which was your angel, your big angel here. But then as she went down, it seemed to be that the angel disappeared. And I'm reading something into it that you've reckoned a little bit with this disease that you are been fighting. Maybe not, but it seems to be less, the angel seems to be less of the emphasis, which I'm curious if that's what's so for you. The second question, you can answer both at the same time, I guess, is I love that you made it dimensional. And I tried to catch what the materials were. I think I got something called plaster and something, but it's really fantastic. And it's got graphite on it. What is that? What did you do? I'm just curious, because my brain, and this is fantastic too. Yeah, so like a little less of the angel. I know that if looking above it, it's like angel's still here, but it's so emotive, and I applaud you just to even walk away and say, I'm complete now with this too. So there's two questions, and then there was a lot of commentary. Sorry about my babbling.
That's okay. In regards to the angels,
This is fantastic. I just so love this one.
So for me, when I'm working, my mind goes to the abstract process, like if you think about like Mondrian's trees and that distillation that happens to a couple of raw forms, I tend to do something similar in that I start trying to distill down my mark making to an economy of lines so that I can really get to that essence of what I'm trying to do. And it's all in that repetition and that distillation. And then
Christine, can you stop for a second right there?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, thanks.
And so yes, that kind of angelic being kind of slowly is dissolving away, and I was working today, and honestly, a couple times it was literally just a dot. And so in this process, I'll be curious where it's going to be a month from now, 4 months from now, because that is kind of my process, this kind of ebbing and flowing. And even like the hands were nearly a rectangular shape in some of the pieces today. So for me, it's that process of exploration. And, I often think about, I did this series, and I'll do another one again eventually, but taking a laser light on air filters and doing 3-second exposures with a camera and drawing with a laser light. And I was able to like reverse them and they look like charcoal drawings, but in my mind, it's like, how do I distill this idea down to its finest, smallest essence, yet still maintaining a narrative and a story there. And so that's kind of, as this process goes, going from, the larger cartoony kind of fiendish angelic being down to these, what are almost merely smudges. For me, this is just kind of like my process is what it truly is. So,
well, and the sculptures, they look like lead to me.
So
I mean,
the sculptures there. So
is it heavy? Like, okay, so this is when I want to like touch everything, kind of. But I'm looking at this. It go 29 by 14 by 14. Okay, so
it's actually it's a simple armature of paper and tape and wire like you would use anywhere else. It's actually plaster gauze like you'd use in elementary school. And then, because I have a background in construction, I know materials and spackle and mud well. I know how to make certain surfaces and textures. And then the whole thing is hand rubbed in graphite, powdered graphite, which gives it that pewter, shiny, metallic finish to it. So it's kind of my go-to. It's like I like it because it plays well because I love drawing. I love the marks in graphite. And so especially in pairings with paintings and sculpture, like it's a great go-to for me as a default for finishing sculpture of the sort, until the day that I can cast them in bronze, of course, but that's down the line.
Well, hugely successful.
Thank you.
I have, it prompts my own emotions. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Vicki. Jessica.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I've gotten to see Eric's work pretty intimately, but I've gotten to see his work over the last 5 years, and the last couple of years gotten to see him work weekly, daily. And, I really noticed that in the past you had this abstraction work, and then you had this kind of sardonic punk illustration work. And this was the first series that I felt like they came together for the first time. And I was wondering, maybe you don't feel the same way, but I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, that has always been a goal, is to bring everything together. I'm constantly adding materials and subject matter, etc., and then distilling them and trying to bring them together. And yeah, it's very true. I've kind of always had these two paths of sorts where I would make work, and I think in part limitations, in part just because of like not having regular studio space, has been a blessing that way, because like, okay, let's figure out how to take this style, using it as a jumping point, and then kind of distilling it from there and working it into the abstraction process. Whereas normally I do, it's more thinking, it's more drawing and working on abstract forms, and then once in a while something like that may have been incorporated, but in this case it's probably the most successful fusing of the more figurative drawing like style of mine, and as well as the more abstracted mark making style. Good question.
No, thanks. That's a great answer.
So I have a question, but I don't know how to raise my hand on.
Oh, hey, Ted.
So I really like your marking system. And I remember when I was younger and I was very sick, I did a lot of very angular, pointy, angry looking marking systems too. And I'm just wondering if before you got sick, I got in here a little late, so I don't know if you showed any of your pre-illness work. Did your marking system change, or is that a result of, being tired and not being able to hold the brush the same way? Or just wondering if visually anything changed when you got sick.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have always enjoyed mark making and line and gesture, and kind of that distillation of the figure, and have done a lot of work like that. That bringing it in and working it to scale though, is new. Working a larger, 4x4, 4x6 feet, and really allowing what I typically kept for smaller pieces, which would be, more layering, more line, more mixed media. I really kind of brought that in and scaled that up here with this work. And so there's definitely some similarities, but I would say that I actually just embraced it embraced it more, and some of it was truly, out of just physical limitation, like, working and drawing so long and literally, not being able to hold a piece of graphite as well as I could. And so, but I enjoy that part of it. And I enjoy that kind of boundary that creates almost kind of a naive form of mark making.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ted. Are there any other questions for Eric? I mean, one of the things especially, that I'm noticing is, just how confident your mark making is. It's, and I mean, I know there's a lot of gesture and expression and, who knows how many layers are underneath, but it's, yeah, there's just, like these drawings of, how I mean, I can almost picture, your, the other work on top of this, I'm filling it in already because I know, your work, and I love that.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it definitely, it feels, I guess, I mean, it feels confident, in a sense. Some of that is editorial, there's a pile of 50 of them that look like crap out there to me, but to me, who knows, to whoever else. And I do like that process, like being a fan of like Giacometti, and like, I like working back in and erasing things and allowing those layers to develop and redoing marks. And in person, these works, like there's, embossing from, using pen nibs to create lines, or even like dragging a bracelet through as I'm like making marks to allow for these gestures. And there are times that, I mean, honestly, there are times where I'll think about it, I'll have something laid out, I'll do it, and it looks good on the first time, and it messes with my head. I'm like, no, I gotta I need to develop this more. And that's one reason, fortunately, I've learned to just work in such quantity, is to always have, many pieces going. So I know to be like, well, before I blow it up, I'm going to set it aside, work on another one, grab another one, work on another one, and then go back. And then, sometimes I'll go back and be like, wow, that actually sucked. What was I thinking before? Great. Now we can blow it up. Or it's like, we'll sit on it. And, it's all right. So, yeah.
Does anybody else want to chime in with any questions or comments or anything?
Hi, this is Linda.
Hi, Linda.
Hi, I'm just wondering about, I'm noticing, I believe you're using latex paint.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a reason for that in particular?
Yeah, I have a one could say intimate relationship with Bear Ultra Pure White. I end up using it in everything for my base, for my gesso, and it started off with just cost effectiveness back in the old days. Some of it is, sometimes I've debated keeping it, but I don't want my work to be too precious. I going to art school and starting off, everything was precious, archival this and that. And it was a limiting factor, and it limited me in such a way that I got to a point where I just had to kind of blow up that narrative and just be like, okay, we're using this paint. I'm here to make, I'm here to create. Many artists before me have made work with a lot more questionable materials. And so for me, I always have gallons of Bare Ultra Pure White flat. And because it I've learned to use the paint so well. Like I know how it dries. I know how flat dries differently from satin to semi-gloss to gloss, and whether I'm dripping and pouring it or if I'm, brushing it. I know how it mixes with graphite. I know how it mixes with other materials. And so over time, it's just become this kind of this piece to my work. And until somebody comes through and truly tells me never to use it again, I'll probably just keep using it. I mean, even like with all the work on, even with the work on paper, it's watercolor paper. I do 2 coats on one side, 1 coat on the other, then back and do another coat. And so, all the watercolor paper is like embedded with it. And that's my base for all my drawings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are your large pieces on canvas?
They are 1/4-inch panel primarily. Some of them are 1/2 inch plywood that I had just kicking around the studio from building.
Okay.
But yeah, the bulk of it is 1/4-inch panel that if I were to show them, I still would need to mount frames on them and whatnot. So, but for now it's great because like behind me in that picture there's a dozen paintings and they store so flat, they're out of the way, they're safe. And so it's so convenient.
It's working.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Linda. I don't think you've touched on this here, and we've talked about it in the past, so forgive me, I can't remember where. But so why hands? Why are you focusing on the hands? Why are they so important in your work?
Yeah, that kind of stems from a few things, and kind of like a how can I say this? For me personally, about a year and a half ago, I started losing the use of my hands. They were becoming very arthritic, very swollen, and so that was on my mind. At the same time, my grandmother had passed away, and I received a photo of her towards the end. She always had kind of these gnarly arthritic hands, and when my hands started becoming arthritic, I started thinking about her hands. And then when I saw this picture of her towards her end of life, and seeing those hands, like it just really stuck to me. And the first painting I did after she passed, I drew her as this kind of cartoon figure reaching up towards a UFO, and I created these hands that were kind of larger and a little more unconventional, which is not completely unusual. I've actually have drawings 20 years ago from that, but it was like there was a different intention behind it. In the past, it had been just more of like a aesthetic decision in mark making, to create a certain energy, what have you. But in this, there was an intention behind it where there's this narrative about those gnarled hands, and that kind of like stuck. And I tried moving away from it a little bit, but then when I began being able to create again last winter, and I was doing these self-portraits, the first series before I began doing the angels and whatnot, I noticed that like as I drew myself, there's this impact, this intention I set on having these kind of almost baseball glove like hands in those pieces. And then through the development and through the process of working these images, it just became more and more important to me to kind of present them like just formally. And also they allowed so much room for action and for the viewer and for me to kind of work on and work with that. I was like kind of like to hell with the rest of the body. Like this is enough for me. And so that's kind of that little process there and why that kind of came about. And they're still morphing and changing, but I have to admit, I like them. I enjoy drawing them. They're a fun facet of this work for me.
definitely. Well, it's interesting how the UFO was, you said, what's the word? Substituted the UFO for the angel.
I did, yes.
Yeah. And I know, like we've talked about, there's just like so many ways of looking at this. I look at your work as if we're looking down and like the hands are foreshortened, because of that perspective, almost like, yeah, I don't know, we're the angels, also looking down on you. And also like this ascension, there's like that idea too, which
Mhm.
has just always fascinated me with your work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and my other question, so what do you listen to when you paint?
Um, that depends. That really depends. It really varies between, well, oh God, this is embarrassing to answer. I'm a pretty broad list on my Spotify, and I listen from anything from electronica to like late 90s, early 2000s rock to binaural beats and Schumann resonances to classical to you know today I love finding random playlists on Spotify, and will often, there's some cleaning playlist. I was listening to that today that has like, I don't know, everything from like Beyonce to Black Eyed Peas on it. So it really kind of depends. It depends on my mood, my state of mind, what I'm actually doing, like what I'm actually doing in the studio. And so, yeah.
You don't have to be embarrassed. I've been listening to K Earth 101 lately. So they've been playing Michael Jackson, Soft Cell, aha. Yeah.
Perfect. Who knew though that question would be the hardest hitting one that would make me squirm the most?
Exactly. Are there any other questions or anything for Eric? No, this has been lovely, Eric. It's so great to, get a more personal, look at your work and, hear more stories and yeah, and just to see the work through your eyes. So thank you so much. And I put the link in chat of the exhibition if you want to go and take a look at it. We'll put this video on YouTube, and the talk will also be on the exhibition later on. So you can check that out too. So thank you everybody so much for being here on Sunday afternoon or evening if you're, coming in from across the US. We're so glad you're here. So I hope everybody has a great afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you everyone for showing up. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you everyone.